Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about why it is both safe and effective to rotate max effort lifts every single week. Because it's something that I do, and a lot of people don't understand that. They will look at something like the max effort method and people who use conjugate training and things like that, and they will look at it and say, well, number one, why do you rotate these lifts all the time? Is it masking strength? Number two, isn't that dangerous? And what people need to understand is that this system is effective for basically everyone who is actually a serious athlete who wants to get stronger and wants to develop maximum strength. This is not just for power lifters. This can apply to someone who says, hey, I just want to get really strong. It's going to apply to field athletes. This can apply to combat sport athletes. And this sort of system is routinely used for all of them. And I mean building up to heavy singles. Now, your max doesn't always have to be an all-out grinder. It doesn't have to be missed lifts. What we are basically doing is taking a variety of lifts, and in my case, I usually do a squat variation and a bench variation both every week. Now, I still do some heavy deadlift singles, but they're usually not to a full even training max always. We just pull to a fairly challenging single, and I rotate those also. But with a system like this, there's a couple of things going on. There's a couple of things going on. Because we are changing the loading parameters all the time, because you're not coming in and just hitting a normal back squat or a competition pause bench, you actually have a lower risk of overuse injuries. Right? You have a lower risk of overuse injuries. Because you are changing the angle slightly, you don't risk as much of a chance of overuse. You also don't reach the same accommodation that's a concern, meaning what they've noticed over the years with the West Side system, and this can then be applied to other athletes, is that if they spend too long on the exact same identical variation, that you tend to stagnate and regress if you're not careful. So what you're doing here, you're getting around your law of accommodation by changing it up, and by changing these all the time, you're bypassing that. The other thing to think about is because you aren't honing in that exact identical one, you are slightly detrained. So let's assume you use 6 or 7 different variations of a squat or a press or whatever, and you use them only once every 7 to 8 weeks, or at most once every 6 weeks. By the time you get around to it each time, you are slightly detrained. Whereas if you did that lift all the time, you will have ingrained a perfect motor pattern for it, which is fine for peaking for a competition if you're trying to get that last 5 pounds out of it or 10 pounds out of it. But because you've detrained, you're basically working upon muscular strength with some training towards a movement pattern. But because it's detrained each time, you are training detrained maxes. And people need to understand there's a difference between a detrained max and a peaked max. With it detrained, you're still getting as much muscular straining. You're getting as much muscular straining, but you don't have it in the perfect bar path to maybe lift the most weight possible. In other words, if you did it all more regularly, your 500-pound lift might actually be a 510 or 520. That matters in terms of preventing injuries because, again, you are forced to use slightly less while still pushing forward with maximum exertion. You're still pushing forward with maximal exertion. So when you look at it from those perspectives, you're actually at a lower risk of injury from doing this, even though you're pushing, with, again, weights above 90%. So that's the other thing that you're doing with it. And I think Dave Tate really explained this really, really well in a system of training like this, is that there's a reason you do this, and there's a reason it's fine to do it on even almost random lifts. You could rotate it and do something you've never done with it. Is that what it does is that it teaches you to strain against an awkward load. It teaches you to strain, because the only way to develop maximum strength is to actually lift maximally. In other words, until you go above 90%, you're never going to produce maximum force and maximum strength. We can do all the rep work in the world that we want to build general strength. We can do all the speed training in the world that we want to build speed strength. But until you actually push or pull or squat against a truly heavy weight for you, you're not going to develop maximum strength. And you're not going to learn how to strain against maximum strength. That's one of the benefits of doing this with different chains and even chain weights. Like for me lately, a lot of times I come through and I just change chain weights every single week. I might do the same variation week to week, but I change the amount of chain weight, which makes it a different lift. It teaches you to learn to grind against maximum weights in a way that's getting heavier. It teaches you to learn how to grind. You have to learn how to grind when the weight gets heavy. And because even a really fast lift, when you start adding accommodation contrast weight like that against a chain, it gets harder as it goes up. It forces what would be an otherwise nice clean, hey, that's just a nice clean training max. It can very quickly turn it into a grinder, because now you have to strain against that part where it starts slowing down and getting heavier. It forces you to learn to strain and struggle a little bit against heavy weight. And it's different when you hit muscle failure. It's one thing to fail on the 6th or 7th or 8th rep with a moderate weight. That's a different form of straining. It's another thing to actually have to struggle against a heavy weight. Because again, maximum weights build maximum strength. All right, that matters. That matters later when you have to get under a max in a competition. That matters when you get out on the football field and you have to hit another player who hits you with everything that he has, and you both have to press against each other for 3 or 4 seconds with maximum effort. It makes a difference of who's going to knock the other one over. Because as soon as everything gets slow and you have to apply maximum force, you better be able to follow through with maximum force when it gets harder. So it gives you an advantage there. The other thing with it is that it trains you to be strong through different planes and angles, and that's the big deal also. The fact that you are changing the variations up, let's say you swap around bars, you swap around chains, you swap around these slightly different angles, and you're hitting those with maximum weights. And maximum doesn't always mean a true all-out max. It means going above 90%, at least a training max. Doesn't mean you struggle for 8 seconds and then fail a lift. That can happen on occasion. But it means that you are forcing yourself to learn to push maximally in a variety of angles and strength curves. Well, that really matters when it comes to when people want to use terms like functional strength. Well, it trains you to get good when you get put into awkward positions. It trains you to get good and to push maximally against sometimes uncertain and changing loads. What does that mean if the bar slips out of the groove, if you have to lift a maximum weight even with just your normal straight weight in your classic lifts? Well, it means that you've learned to be good at different angles where things are slightly awkward. That means that you're going to have a lower chance of getting hurt because you are strong at different joint angles and slightly different bar paths. All right, it's more well-rounded maximum strength. So when you think about it in terms of how does that carry over to injury rates in competition for powerlifting? How does that carry over to injury rates when you get out on a football field, or you get into a jiu-jitsu match, or you get into a life and death struggle? Right? When we start talking about taking it outside of the gym and into any other environment where things are no longer fully controlled to the same degree, or you have to really push with everything that you have, because you are stronger through a variety of angles, because you have more well-rounded maximum strength. Not only are you going to be a little bit better at being able to push through when things go wrong, you're also going to be less likely to get hurt. You're going to be less likely to get hurt. So stuff like this that looks scary to a lot of people, when you really start thinking it through, when you start thinking through, number one, in terms of the gym, and you start thinking in terms of sports or the real world, this reduces your chances of getting hurt. And I'm not saying people can't get hurt. I'm not saying that injuries don't happen. Injuries can happen no matter what. You can slip and fall down walking outside your door in the morning and be permanently injured or die. It could happen. I mean, you could be injured or die just driving in your car every day. Injuries happen. Everything carries a risk. But what you're doing with stuff like this is that you're actually training your body in a lot of ways to have a slightly lower risk of injury. right? This is actually a method of injury prevention, even though those who look at it at first like, oh man, that's scary, now that you get hurt doing that. If you're careful, that's not always the case. It's actually a lower chance of getting hurt all the way around, both inside the gym and out. And particularly for an athlete, there's a reason this stuff works particularly well for people who compete in different sports. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.